Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. Is it really all that hard to get a book published? The simple answer is no. Is it really that easy to sell your new book? Well, that answer is not as simple, but is also a resounding no. Our next guest brings us decades of insight into the publishing world, along with a desire to see transformation through sharing your faith. He's a friend of many and all-around good guy. His first love are his family, his family, books, coffee, and running. By day, he works for Nori Media Group as an acquisitions and marketing publishing executive. He's the host of the popular podcast, The Shaun Tabatt Show on Destiny Image Podcast Network, the new daily devotional podcast. He's just launched a new marketing and platform development for Christian Creatives Group on Facebook. He and his wife are the proud parents of 10 amazing children. Titus, his newest, is walking, and he's regularly seen here as a featured guest the first Monday of every month at the 11 o'clock hour. Shaun Tabatt, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Well, Eric, it's always good to speak with you, my friend. I'm excited to see where our conversation goes today.
Well, as I always am, you live a life of your hands are in a number of things. You have the publishing end of it, and you've got the podcasting end of it, and those have finally started to converge a little bit, which is really interesting because they were at one point very independent operations and two unique aspects of your personality, of your calling, but you found a way to move them together, and I think that it is the platform of the future as we leapfrogged satellite and we went to on demand when we launched. This is kind of the new venue of how to get information out there in the kind of dialogue style that you and I use. Now, you've just come back from a conference, a writers' conference, never been to one, don't really know what happens at them, and don't know what the fruit of a writers' conference is supposed to be. Is it a meet and greet? Is it an exchange of ideas? Is it workshops? Maybe you can give us a little understanding, because there's the Appalachian Writers Conference, and there's the Southern. They're all over the place, but I'm not sure that these writers' conferences, do the big players, is that where they got their start? Would they ever attend one? Who goes to them? What happens at them? And why are they important?
Yeah, this is actually the first writers' conference I've been a part of, ironically, as well. But this is the Northwestern Christian Writers Conference. It's put on every summer by the good folks up at Northwestern College in Minnesota. It's an interesting venue because they bring together a collection of industry people, so people who work in marketing and editorial and acquisitions. They also bring together a range of experienced authors, some who are a few books in, some who've been writing and publishing for 15, 20, 25 years. The unique thing about the conference this year is it was all online. Originally, we were all supposed to be up in Minnesota for a long weekend, hanging out, having dinner, having a great time. But we did the entire conference via Zoom, which came together very well. And the big things, I think, we had a handful of different keynote speakers from the really big name authors, and then the rest of the conference was broken up into every person got to give, every speaker gave a talk. I gave a talk called Podcasting for Fun and Profit. So talked all about podcasting and promoting and why that's important. I think the part I really enjoyed the most was getting to be a part of kind of an Ask Me Anything sort of Q&A panel with a few other marketing and editorial folks where people could attend and just ask us anything they wanted to ask related to publishing and marketing, which was just a good time. I enjoyed that. And then they also had a range of one-on-one sessions, so you could book a time with any of the different professionals who were part of the event speaking and just get a 10-minute block to pitch your book idea, ask questions about promotion, whatever it might be. So, I can't speak for what it looks like at the average writers conference, but from my viewpoint, the team at Northwestern Colleges did a bang-up job and delivered a fantastic event. And even though they completely had to shift from in-person to online, they really knocked it out of the park. So all in all, it was a very good experience for me. And I've gotten emails and Facebook messages from people who watched my sessions and participated, and so the feedback's been really fantastic. It's always nice to know that somebody watched and paid attention, and you at least provoked them enough to ask a follow-up question. So all things considered, it was a great experience.
So there's workshops, and people hear the stories, success stories, tips for how to get your book out there, how to get in front of people. How much time did you spend on what is our biggest issue, which is getting the author engaged in them understanding that from the moment you have an idea, it is yours from life to death. Broadcasters like ourselves, although we have our own marketing teams and we have our own promotion, we're not the first line of marketing, nor are you, to bring a book to market. And so when they, for example, there's an interview on this program. After the program, the live interview is over, it goes to post-production. The audio and video are synced up, captioning's put in, B-roll's put in, it's packaged, and then it's uploaded to YouTube. We send the YouTube link to the author and to the publicist and say, okay, use it for anything you want. And then a month later, they look up and they see that there were 9 views. And they say, well, what kind of channel is that? And I say, well, you got 9 views out of 3 million views. You tell me, what did you do? Did you put the interview on your website? Did you put it in your newsletter? Did you tell people 3 days before the interview you were going to be on live? Did you tell them the day of you're going to be on live? Did you tell them after it was produced that you were on live? And do you do those things? We actually provide, because we were frustrated, we provide a marketing plan as a recommendation. Did you hear some of that emphasized? Was that part of your emphasis? Because the day of, unless you are a named best-selling author, and there's a few of them, Dr. Gary Chapman, okay? Dr. Gary Chapman writes a book, you know it's going to sell. It doesn't require a whole lot of marketing, but yet there's a whole lot of marketing that's done. Jonathan Cahn, 20, 30, 40 million copies sold, and there's not a day go by that I don't get a press release from Hamilton about a little aspect of the new release of The Harbinger 2. There's a lot of work that goes into this that's required to get your book out there, because you're competing against, and I don't know the numbers, you probably know the numbers better, but it's like 8.5 million titles on Amazon that you're competing against.
Yeah, I don't know how many you're to date what you're competing against on Amazon, but in any particular week, I mean, there are I would think it's fair to say hundreds of new books that are coming on the market. In my particular session at the conference, I didn't focus on that aspect of book marketing in particular, but you were very right. One of the biggest frustrations I think I have as a content creator, and obviously I know you have this too, Eric, is you put in the time to doing the interview, getting it out there, and then it just, outside of your own promotion, you don't always see publishers and authors doing their part to promote it in their channels. And honestly, it's like low-hanging fruit. You've got a long-form conversation that promotes the book, gets people excited about the author and the content, and so that is a big loss if you don't take that, especially if you're being equipped with graphics and links and all the things you need to promote it. That's just an easy home run, is to go out and put that out on your social media channels. I think one place people miss out a lot is including stuff like that in their newsletters. Email marketing is still one of the most effective channels, because your email list tends to be folks that are very bought into your message, and definitely are the people who are going to want to hear about what's new, what you're talking about. So, but yeah, I mean, it is interesting. The days of you publish a book and the publisher just takes care of all the marketing and everything and promotion. Not to say that publishers don't, but as we've talked about before in the program, there is a window, kind of that 3 months leading up to when the book releases and sort of that 60 to 90 days after. That's when the publishing team, the marketing team is going to spend the most time. That's where they're going to be very focused. And when they get 30, 60 days out, that is when they have new books coming up, and the next month cycle's coming through, and they're going to move on and start promoting those. So the reality is, from, like you said, from when you have that idea to, after that book is a few years old, it is on the backlist. You as the author are kind of the point person, the face of that message to be out there promoting it. And so I always tell authors, if you're looking to decide what to write about next, make sure it's something you want to be promoting and talking about for years to come, because that's what helps to keep it fresh. That's what helps to keep books certainly moving. Anything in terms of being successful in publishing, from concept to writing to promotion, it's a marathon and not a sprint. It takes a lot of effort to do it well.
It does. I'm starting to see a number of publishers revitalize some backlisted books because the author has now gained some traction in the new genres, and saying, wait a second, they've got 9 other books. And those 9 other books have been backlisted. Maybe it's time to dust them off, because the name recognition is important. And we have on our program, as you know, a featured guest program, and we bring them on their first book, but then we go through their backlist and we harvest contemporary topics which they address in those. Still contemporary, we don't do anything that has a timestamp. I don't think you do much in the area of promotion that's time-stamped. Like, you don't do events that say, because it expires, I can't ever use it again. The event happened, there's no future marketability. I can't build my playlist on YouTube with things that are already over. All right, so we don't cover a lot of movies or movie releases, and we do cover some actors because they're in several, so the Sorbos, for example, they're on often because they always have something going, and they're fun people and they're interesting people, and we try to mix it up, as do you in the Destiny Image Podcast Network. Now, are you exclusively on the Destiny Image Podcast Network, or do you still maintain an independent Shaun Tabatt distribution?
As far as distribution of the audio content, that exclusively goes through our hosting servers. We use Liberated Syndication for our podcast hosting, which is who I'd used for years before joining the Destiny Image Podcast Network. I do still maintain all of my own personal social media channels and put content out on my YouTube channel as well. But a lot of the content kind of coexists between the Destiny Image branded pages and places, and also mine as well. And so, not unlike a publisher who's putting out a book, often the publisher will be promoting it places, and the author hopefully should. I'm kind of doing that same thing on the podcasting side as well. And to touch back what you said earlier about backlist, what often happens is an author gets known, like the Jonathan Cahn has just had massive success. I don't know that we can say he gets known for one thing, but the average author, there's one book, there's some signature message that is the one they're known for. And if that's your very first book, that's the one people are always going to refer to. But often an author gets, several books down the journey, and maybe it's their 3rd, 4th, or 5th book that really pops. And when that book really just rises to the top, that's when you will often see the publisher go back and kind of mine the backlist and maybe freshen things up, new title, new cover, that sort of a thing. Also, things move in cycles. Every 10 years, there's kind of a new crop of things that need to be addressed. So maybe you'll dust something off of the backlist at that time. But yeah, if an author rises to prominence, that's a great time to start looking at mining their backlist and just helping to expand the marketplace for their messages.
You spent time with a bunch of Christian writers at a conference I'm sure that there were unpublished authors, those who were trying to break in, and the speakers were people who have had some accomplishments in publishing and in particular areas. Uh, was there a general spirit? Was there a general sense that you came away with of direction? Uh, Everything's COVID-19, COVID-19, COVID-19. Were people looking ahead at the restructuring of family of homeschooling or of survival in or the ever-changing society issues? People looking at what will church look like in the next 10 years, because it's not going to look anything like it's looked like in the last 10 years where we saw the mega church movement. Now we're seeing the dismantling of much of the mega church movement. Did you come away with anything that was surprising to you? Anything that you were, from a crystal ball kind of perspective, saying, well, that's interesting, that's something I'm going to keep my eye on because that really piqued my interest?
I would say that we had those specific kinds of interactions at the conference. I mean, people tended to have a particular book idea that they were pitching, and so they were looking for feedback on how to best position that, how to get it in front of an acquisitions editor, or how to best promote it. So a lot of the conversations tend to be in the areas of acquisitions and marketing. But I can say, from my vantage point as a marketer, or as somebody who does acquisitions and talks to lots of authors like you do, all those things you just mentioned are messages that need to be written, that need to be put together right now. I think on the one hand, some of the things you mentioned, I feel like the market's kind of flooded with COVID-19 resources right now, so I don't know if I'd recommend going down that path. If you have a specific message, maybe that would be something best to self-publish, because most publishers have put together the things that they're going to put together on that topic. But messages about, the future of the church, what does it look like to do church differently, things that are focused more around house churches and kind of alternative mega church sort of venues and systems. I think those are all things that we are going to need resources to start addressing, because if we kind of take a look at what we see going on across the country right now, there aren't a lot of church gatherings right now. We certainly do see some churches defying government orders. I have a good friend down in Texas, the county he's in, their church can be wide open and they'll have close to 3,000 people in on a Sunday. So, situationally, it varies greatly by where you are across the country. But at the end of the day, we do need to be providing resources that address the cultural issues of our day. Probably one of the biggest challenges for writing books to address contemporary topics right now is the speed to market. You're gonna, if you're gonna work with a traditional publisher, you're probably gonna have to find somebody who's willing to take a chance and put something out very quickly, versus if you would go a more traditional route with some of these contemporary, current issue-driven messages. By the time those would come to market 12, 18 months down the road, who knows what the cultural conversation is going to be. So if God's really putting something like that in your heart, self-publishing could be a route, or work with one of the publishers who are equipped to turn a project around very quickly. But all things that need to be said.
Shaun, Destiny Image and Nori have aligned themselves with some very large vocal people, some big names. Today, some of those big names are coming under attack. There's some stepping down. There's some revisiting theology. There is some recanting. There's some repentance. There's some literal removal. Probably Destiny Image is probably more impacted because that's the strata of leader that you have published in the past. The old adage is all press is good press, or any press is good press. Are you finding Destiny Image and I haven't heard the publisher ever brought into the discussion. It's always the individual and the church and the organization that are brought into the discussion. But I have to think from my side of it, there's some evaluation that's going on behind closed doors that's saying, whoops, this guy says that, yeah, he's probably oversold hyper grace and he needs to, he repents of it, and he's oversold the prosperity gospel, and he's pulling back on it, or he's stepping down because he's been accused of this kind of thing. How do publishers respond to the negative press that turns usually into a feeding frenzy, because people love the gossip, they love the negative side of it? They almost delight in the elevation of a person, and they delight in the destruction of a person. And in both cases, they forget that there's a person behind the person. And there's not a whole lot of compassion. It's been a problem I've had in my short 25 years as being part of the Christian world, is in Judaism, we basically never had anything nice to say about you from the day we met you, so nothing changed. You know, so if you got sued and the Bernie Madoff kind of thing, yeah, oh, well, that was expected of him, or you know, it's a differently knit community that's kind of been, we've been in a battle for so many thousands of years that we're, you know, there are no big names, if you will. You can't, there's no heavyweight Jewish champion of the world. Right? But in Christianity, there's a lot of big names. Right? And you do live in a glass house. How does that impact you? And does it put you in an uncomfortable position? Or is there a real reality check that a publisher says, listen, we have a responsibility to publish what, when somebody comes to us and says, the Lord is saying this to me, we're not in a position to question, and I'm not in a position to question. Somebody says to me, the Lord said to me, I might say, no, he didn't. Okay. How do you handle that? Is there is there a response? Is there a kind of sit back and watch and see how it plays out?
Sure.
What do you do?
Well, there's often not a textbook or a rule book for a lot of these situations, so you do have to kind of take them on a case-by-case basis. I haven't faced any massive difficulties yet at the time working for Destiny Image as far as like moral issues or big challenges like that. I feel like the landscape changes a little bit when it's something that's published versus something that's still in process. That's why often in a contract there will be some kind of like a moral turpitude clause or something that, you know, basically says if you have a moral failure, we as the publisher have a right to cancel this project. So we did have a case at Bethany House back in the day where an author was found to have had some pretty big moral failures early on in his ministry career. It wasn't handled very well, and then a victim came out, and it was a big catastrophe. We did end up canceling that publishing project within a few days of that all coming to light, just because it, you know, the depth of the problem that was being found out just would have made it would just wouldn't have been responsible to publish that book. But you know, probably one of the biggest challenges right now is kind of our cancel culture and this want of, well, I've just declared this as such, and there's not a lot of time spent investigating or finding out what's truth versus what's just accusation and whatnot. And so we do have to take that very seriously if there's a problem that's brought to light, yet we don't want to just immediately throw everybody under the bus just because somebody said they're concerned. Because at the end of the day, when you're publishing provocative messages. When you're publishing charismatic and spirit-empowered resources, there's a whole line of people who just disagree with what you're doing and would say that, they don't even feel that the Holy Spirit works today, let alone prophetic books and edgier books. So I think to some degree, operating in the charismatic space, some level of discontent or disagreement just comes with the territory. I would say biblical standards come into play as far as morality and what's right and what's wrong. Theological issues, outside of what we read in the Bible, sometimes that can be a bit of my opinion versus your opinion. So I would say, based on what I've experienced through the years thus far, and as I just look at how to approach it, if something comes forward, we're going to want to investigate it. We're going to want to try to figure out as best we can what the truth is, and then make the best decision that we can as we look to the future. But if it's something, like I said, if it's something that's not yet published, I feel like that's pretty easy because you can pull the project. If it's something that you've already invested in and it's out in the marketplace, even your ability as a publisher outside of we're going to pull it out of inventory and just stop selling it, you can't stop that message from being out in the marketplace at this point because it still exists. So, my feel is I always want to give the author the benefit of the doubt as much as I can. I always want to find out what truth is. Just if we look at what we've seen in the news cycle the last couple of years, there's been so many false accusations and just so many challenging things brought to light, some of it true, some of it not true, that we have to tread very lightly and pursue truth and let truth prevail rather than just immediately writing everybody off because somebody said, well, there's a problem there.
It's very interesting. You and I have had some very candid conversations about a betrayal I went through back in 2013. In 2017, I was asked to write an expose. It was a pretty big advance and it was a pretty big offer saying, are you willing to blow the lid off of this entire operation? We'll make it very financial. And I said, and it was a Christian publisher, and I said, you're the National Enquirer. That's all you are. If there's something wrong, and this was the message God gave to me in my situation, was I never spoke on my own behalf. God told me that if I opened my mouth in defense of anything, He would take His hands off of it. It would become my problem. But if He was going to be my vindication, that I was to keep my mouth shut and say nothing and do nothing. And here it is 7 years later. I've been vindicated 1,000 times over. You can tell by a fruit, the fact that we just signed with the Now Network and added another 250 million homes to our one program, Revealing the Bible, which is, I think, the only instructional verse-by-verse Bible teaching in Hebrew and English that exists on television, verse by verse. Genesis 1:1, I think there's 5 30-minute shows just on Genesis 1:1. It's like a master's PhD kind of level, but it's in half-hour chunks, so it's really easy to digest. I don't believe that God would continue to open the doors and bring people like Shaun Tabatt into my life if I was not vindicated. And so you have to take the spiritual spectrum as to whether or not there's restoration, whether or not there's reconciliation, whether or not there's those kind of things. But the fact that I was approached by that really stunned me. That they said, we want all the dirt. We want all you. You were there at the top. I was second from the top. You know it all. You knew every bit of it, and we want to know, and we want to blow the lid off of this. And I said, there's the Jedi, nothing to see here. Okay, keep on moving. Nothing to see here. And I said, and they said, what would it take? And I said, there's nothing you can say, there's nothing you can do to ever make me do that. That's vindictive. that is not biblical. I said, it doesn't even follow Matthew 18 in any way possible. If I were to bring this group before the church, it would be before its own board. I wouldn't bring it before the public. The public is nobody's church. You don't bring these. So very, very interesting dynamic in the publishing world, and in what we call Christianity, because what you and I call biblical life and what others call the Christian life are not the same thing. And it becomes apparent when you and I interview people and you ask them questions and they give you answers and you say, well, wait a minute, that's not right. That's not, it doesn't say that. You know, and you and I can't, we're not investigative journalists. Okay? We're talking heads. Okay? We're Phil Donahue. You know, that's who we are. We're not exposing the errancy of somebody. And quite honestly, if we do our job, we wouldn't have them on the program in the first place. So that should rarely happen. We're talking with Shaun Tabatt, as we do each month at this time, at the 11 o'clock hour on the first Monday of every month. And we talk about the industry. We talk about not only the publishing industry and the book industry, but podcasting, on-demand broadcasting, the message of Christianity, the vehicles in which Christianity and the message goes out, what you can do if you have a burning message that you want to get out, how you can get involved in things to do, and to give you an entree, give you a point of contact. Shaun has been very gracious to respond to many, many people who have asked for help and direction, and there are many other resources out there that's what he does. He's kind of a the guy in the know of, oh, go to this guy, go to this guy, go to this guy. Nope, don't pitch it there. They're not going to be interested, but take it over here. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the senses that we're gathering from the people we're interviewing. Now, granted, some of these books were projects that are 9 months in the making and are now being released, but the spirit is present and the spirit is real in the moment that you're talking about it. And oftentimes it's very different than the spirit that was there at the book's inception. And this kind of gives us a prophetic landscape as to what are people sensing. Now, we do several programs here of just doing that. It's our finger on the pulse of the prophetic movement across America and really across the globe. But Shaun gets to talk to some of the same people I do. Very different approach, very different content structure. Mine is much more theological because that's what people come to me for. Shaun's is much more relational because that's what people come to Shaun for. And so you'd say, well, why would two people who do similar things be on together? It's like saying, why are Derek Gilbert and I from Skywatch TV, why do we do a program together when Skywatch TV does something similar? It's because there's different reasons why, and it's time that we, you and I, are the ones that took all the division in the industry that existed for so many years and all the walls that were built and said, all the walls are knocked down. The middle wall of partition is gone from the industry. We are now going to cooperatively raise the level and be resources for each other and make a contribution as believers instead of by our title and by our employers, by making a difference in what the future looks like by learning the lessons from the past, which was my for and no more. And so I thank you for being a part of that. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to join me and my special featured guests twice per month with Rabbi Zev Porat and Carl Gallups, and monthly with Dr. Michael Heiser Dr. Michael Lake, Dr. Timothy Jennings, Dr. Mark Baker, Dr. Jeffrey Johnson, Drs. Michelle and Mark Sherwood, Dr. Kim Moss, Derek Gilbert, Peter Rosenberger, Brandon Gallops, Steve Fair, Stephen Black, and Shaun Tabatt for in-depth insights into Israel, prophecy, the unseen realm, the brain, spiritual warfare, overcoming shame, mysteries of the Bible, prophetic insights, the sensational and the supernatural, caregiving, addiction recovery, understanding the divided heart, same-sex attraction, and much more. We're proud to feature some of the greatest biblical minds from both Israel and around the United States. Check out our featured guest lineup and 24/7 feed on ignitinganation.com or watch by topic on any device with our free apps. If you can't find what you need, you're just not looking in the right place. Follow us on social media and download our free apps today.
With today's smartphone technology, news, information, sports, and entertainment is widely available and almost unbounded. But what about the information that believers in Yeshua are looking for? Well, now there's an app for that. Igniting a Nation now has apps available for Android and iPhone. With our app, you'll gain access to everything you would in our website, from our featured guests to our live streaming shows. Visit Google Play or the Apple Store and download Igniting a Nation's new app today.
Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to join me and Israel's #1 rated guide, Edo Canaan, for our annual Israel trip. Our 2022 trip is now open for registration for our 18th trip to Israel. Our trip will take us from Tel Aviv to the Galilee, down to the Dead Sea, and 4 nights in Jerusalem. You will walk where Yeshua walked and watch the Bible turn from black and white to living color. Visit ignitinganation.com/events and download the registration form today. No, it's not too early to take advantage of our payment plan designed to fit any budget. All of our trips sell out, and we want you to experience this life-changing journey. Registration is now open for April 2nd to 13th, 2022, and we promise you, you will never read your Bible the same way again. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, and as we do in the 11 o'clock hour on the first Monday of every month, we have Shaun Tabatt join us for the Shaun Tabatt Show right here on the Igniting a Nation Broadcasting Network. You're watching him live on Amazon Fire TV, Roku, Android TV, and Apple TV, as well as connected through 250,000 servers now operating in 110 countries. So Shaun, you are being heard and seen in places that from Botswana to our second largest market, which will may or may not shock you, but our second largest live market's India. They are desperate for Christian broadcasting and for good quality Christian television. So it's been really amazing the feedback we've gotten out of India. Before we went to break, we were talking about how we've kind of bridged and we've merged, and people who would not normally be friends or would be friends on the floor of the Christian Broadcast Association meetings and have lunch together, but then they'd break off and be distinct. We've blurred a lot of the lines of distinction, and we're going to continue to do that as we're doing with other partnerships that we've formed, because it's time for us to stop being like the church, which is denominationally divided, and saying that, hold on a second, we are a service bureau to the body, and we have insights and exposure and experiences that they're not going to get anywhere else. And if they don't watch you, they may watch us but not watch you, but they're not going to get that blend of you and I comparing notes, which is completely different than the singularity of the shows that we do. You and I talked to a lot of people. We talked to a lot of the same people, and we talked to a lot of different people. We have 26 featured guests. They're on with us every month, and so we've built years of relationship, and we get to talk about the tone and tenor and the spiritual move. But you too get to talk about the spiritual move of what's happening, and you walk over the sense of it. And one of the notes you wrote me was that you were starting to see this deliverance from a spirit of heaviness that's been popping up with several authors. Talk about that with me, because we just had Kim Moss on, who is a dear friend of ours, somebody we love dearly, who's one of my prophetic safe people, if you will. There's a lot of sensationalists out there. There's very few true, what I consider to be people that operate in the gift of prophecy in today's world that aren't looking to buy a $64 million airplane.
Well, just like in publishing, we'll see people, all of a sudden there'll be four people writing kind of a similarly themed book at the same time. And we often equate that to a move of God, that the Spirit of God is breathing on something. It's a need in the body. And so God will, say, hey, these 3, 4, 5 people go and, have a burden for this message. And it was interesting, last week, this came up twice for media that I was a part of. First was an episode of Jake Cale's podcast. He's another podcaster on the Destiny Image Podcast Network, also a Destiny Image author. He put out a podcast episode themed around deliverance from the spirit of heaviness. And so that went out last Monday. It was his most downloaded episode ever. And then a couple days later, Larry Sparks, Pugh and I did a live stream with Christy Johnson, another Destiny Image author. She has a new book that just came out. And when we got to kind of the prayer and intercession time that we'd planned for our live stream, she just came out and said, I feel like God wants us to really press in and pray for people to be delivered, be released from a spirit of heaviness. And so that came up twice for me last week for media that I was a part of producing. And I just think as this COVID-19 stuff, I don't even know what to call it anymore, as people have endured that and the churches continue to be shut down and things are just, it's chaos. It continues to be chaos all across the world, let alone, what we see outside our front door. And I think everybody is struggling and suffering from a spirit of intense heaviness. Nothing is the same. We face so many different challenges. And, for whatever reason, God just saw fit to, for the channels that I help influence, we were able to put out 2 messages that really touched on that subject. And, it was always intriguing to me to see that when, often when God's moving, when I can see him moving in the same way in 2, 3, 4 different places, I get excited because I'm like, all right, God's in that, God's on that. So yeah, spirit of heaviness came up a couple times for me last week.
What they're claiming to be COVID-19 related deaths, there have been a number of major voices in Christian history, Morris Cerullo and some others who have passed on, that have given us time to reflect on their 50, 60, 70 years of contribution. My mother just celebrated her 94th birthday. She played a round of golf. Then at 5 o'clock she had a martini, and at 7 o'clock she was out dancing. So she said, you people that are worried about COVID-19, here's the solution. Play golf, have a martini at 5 o'clock, and go dancing. That's her solution. That's how she's living her life. But we've lost some voices that make us take this time to appreciate that life is fleeting. Life, none of us are promised. We lose some in tragedies, we lose some in disease, and we lose some just in pure age. You have wonderful people like Don Finto celebrating milestone birthdays. But you know that as age moves along, we'll be also celebrating his memory at some point. Not that we want to advance that at all. In publishing and in media, should there be something we should be doing as we identify these? Should we be taking time out of our programming and get together collectively and do something special? Should that be something that we initiate? Some of them represented by 9 different publishers. Those 9 publishers are not going to get together and do a tribute, but we're independent. You're semi-independent. I'm completely independent. Should there be more that we do to cast light into some of these areas?
Yeah, I think we're definitely in a season where more collaboration is needed, whether it's around reflecting on the legacy of a great voice, somebody who's gone home to be with the Lord, or could also be just to address the challenges, the issues that we see with culture. We've seen so many interesting things popping up related to social media and distribution channels, even email lists, things getting canceled, shut down temporarily, demonetized, so many different things, especially in the past 2-3 months, where that's a concern ongoing, that I think they're for the survival of the messages we're putting out and for continued dissemination of our messages. I think new levels of partnership are going to be called for, or being able to be distributed in channels that we have a higher level of ownership and control over. I think that's going to be very, very important as we look ahead. Also, I think we really need to be willing to go after what are the things that God is calling each of us to pursue in our own channels. Like you said, you and I have different styles. We're God gives us burdens for different things, and we need to be willing to step out and go after things that God is calling us to produce media around. I've done a lot of content the last month or two, and looking ahead as we move towards the election, a lot of stuff about the history of our country, a lot of stuff about our founding fathers, and just really trying to be a voice putting out what I perceive to be truth about the founding of our nation, kind of the spirit and character of our founding fathers. I feel like there's a lot of cancel culture and misinformation that is being put out right now around the history of our nation. Also, just being willing to step out and talk about intercession and what is needed for the church to step out and be bold. I get it. Pastors want to do the right thing. Sometimes pastors are underneath a board who is very scared to defy anybody. And yeah, there are real challenges involved. I get that legally and all that. But at the same time, it feels like the church just kind of shut down everywhere. I know a handful of pastors who are stepping out, some even in defiance of orders to keep their churches open. And that does come with an element of risk. But if we look back to February and March, when all of this began to start, we've slowly seen, rights and freedoms just go down and go down and go down. You just, pull this thing away, pull that thing away. I know there's a lot of people who are like, you're all crazy. It's all conspiracies. We don't want to kill grandma. I get the fear. I get the concern. But I don't think you can argue with the fact that rights continue to go down. Our ability to just operate freely within society, our ability to assemble as Christians to worship the God that we follow, that's being ripped away. And as much as people don't want to look at it, it is a big concern. So as I feel like as God's placing things on our hearts, we do need to be bold and step out, bring on guests, bring on conversations that are going to tackle those issues, and invite people to be a part of the conversation. You don't have to believe me. You can think I'm crazy. You can think I'm a conspiracy theorist. That's for you to decide. But we do need to be able to have free conversations and exchange ideas, because ideas do matter and ideas shape culture. So what God's leading us to go after, we should be going after those things.
That's one of the reasons why we maintain such a close relationship with Skywatch, is because they have investigators. They have Allie Anderson is a licensed private investigator. She digs deep. Donna Howe dig deep. Derek Gilbert dig deep into these conspiracies, and they prove. They bring evidence to light, which I think is incredibly important for this time. These are Christian issues that we're talking about. These are issues really for all faith, but yet Christianity is under fire, as is Judaism. We're used to it. We're fairly expert at it, and survived it. But Christianity is kind of new at this, and I think there's a lot of people withdrawing. There's a lot of people who are becoming silent because of the fear of persecution. And there is persecution, and it's real. We've been talking with Shaun Tabatt, as we do on the first Monday of every month in the 11 o'clock hour for the Shaun Tabatt Show, where we collectively compare notes about podcasting, about publishing, about books, about authors, about Christian communications, and what we see happening out there. We always appreciate Shaun's candor and point of view and perspective, and we always look forward to having him here. He'll be back with us next month. We hope you'll tune in then to follow us for his regular appearance here as a featured guest on the first Monday of every month, the 11 o'clock hour. You can find out more about him at ShaunTabatt.com. Shaun, until we see you next month, we pray blessings over you, and we keep looking for the videos of Titus and his newfound feet.
Oh, yes. I'll be sure to put more videos of Titus out to keep people entertained. And Eric, it's always a joy to spend time with you, my friend. Thank you for all the hard work you do. You are an asset to the Christian media space, sir.
Well, thank you. God bless you for that. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.